Thank you all for joining AARP Georgia today for a conversation on a new survey that shows candidates for governor and U.S. Senate should pay close attention to Georgians age 50 and over, with issues such as the economy and inflation top of mind for these voters. I'm Deborah Tyler Horton, State Director for AARP Georgia, and I'm pleased to welcome two of the top public opinion pollsters and political strategists in the field today who conducted our research. At AARP, our mission is to make sure that the most important issues facing older adults, that voters age 50 and older are the largest voting bloc in the country. This is especially true for Georgians 50 plus. They are a crucial voting demographic, consistently showing up to the polls and making a key difference in election outcomes in Georgia. In the state's 2018 midterm elections, the 50 plus made up nearly 55% of the electorate. Today, we're here to highlight findings from our brand new poll to understand the issues that matter to the Georgian 50 plus voting bloc, how they plan to vote in November, and the influence they are likely to have during the 2022 midterm election cycle. We've enlisted the help of prominent pollsters who will help us dig into our research findings and their implications for the upcoming primaries and building up to the general election. Matt Hogan, partner at Impact Research, has extensive experience polling on issues such as healthcare, education, tax policy, immigration, and election reform. He has polled for candidates at all levels of government, from mayor to the U.S. Senate, and has worked for the Democratic nominee in the past 4 U.S. presidential elections, polling in both the primary and the general election for President Joe Biden, as well as for President Obama in his 2012 re-election campaign. Republican pollster Bob Ward, partner at Fabricio Ward, has 30 years of public and stakeholder opinion research experience, specializing in corporate image, reputation, and issues management. His counsel and research has guided a wide range of client engagements, from product liability crisis, high-profile litigation, long-term reputation measurement and management, to message development, supporting everything from rebranding universities, launching advocacy groups, product rollouts, and public affairs campaigns designed to influence policymakers. Thank you both for being here today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This event is being recorded, and we will share the link later today. We will be muting the room while speakers are presenting, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. And you can also add any questions into the chat along the way. And with that, let's dive in. Matt and Bob, tell us about the findings from this important poll. Bob, let's start with you.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm going to share my screen so we can take a look at some of the numbers. I think it's good to just start off to let you know what, in fact, we polled. So Impact and Fabrizio Ward conducted a survey of Georgia likely voters. We surveyed just under 1,200 of them. There is a 500 sample core survey of likely voters 18 plus in these survey results. We oversampled voters 50 plus to have a total sample of 815 voters 50 plus likely voters. And then we also oversampled Black voters 50 plus to have a total sample of 400 Black voters, 50 plus likely voters. The survey just came out of the field. The polling dates were July 5th through the 11th. So this is very fresh data. And let's get started with the two races that we polled. And there's some very interesting findings. We'll start with the governor's race, where Brian Kemp has a 7-point lead over Stacey Abrams. That lead is really due to voters 50 plus, where he has a 15-point lead. It's also due to independent voters. So both Abrams and Kemp are maximizing their partisan bases, each getting about 95% of the vote among their own partisans. But among independents, Kemp has a 14-point lead. And that's the so between voters 50 plus and independents generally, that's the difference here. Also note that Kemp is winning just over 21% of Black voters 50 plus, which is high for a Republican to get, even in Georgia. And we compare that to what's going on in the Senate race. Here, Senator Warnock has a 3-point lead over Herschel Walker, 50 to 47. Walker does do better among voters 50 plus, but not nearly as well as what's going on in the governor's race. And I think this demonstrates, something that we don't see a lot these days, which is ticket splitting, and it's happening here in Georgia. So voters are making choices. They're not hewing right down the party line. They're looking at candidates. Walker's not winning among independents, where Kemp has a 14-point lead. Warnock has a 3-point lead among independents. So there's a lot of interesting findings here in the poll. I'll pause here and ask Matt Hogan to have his comments.
Yeah, the two things that jump out to me from this, as Bob noted, are the independents, the fact that you have a 17-point net swing between them, with Kemp leading them by 14, but Warnock leading them by 3, I think really highlights why we see the difference in the two races. And the other thing I would note is, and Bob alluded to this too, is Abrams is leading by 50 points among Black voters 50 plus, but Democrats typically win that voting block by 80 point margin, just like Black voters overall. So if that margin holds, because Black voters make up a third of the overall Georgia electorate, that's a 6-point net swing in the overall vote. So if Democrats got the performance they typically get with Black voters, this is the governor's race, a tied race, or a 1-point race versus the 7-point advantage that Kemp currently has now. So the fact that Kemp is getting a fifth of the Black 50 plus vote is pretty significant.
So let's take a look at the candidates. So all 4 candidates in these two races are pretty well defined. There's few, no opinion, never heard ofs. Herschel Walker probably has the lowest, but even still, he's almost universally defined. People have an opinion of him one way or the other. The only candidate among the 4 that has a higher positive image than negative is Governor Kemp, who has a net positive image of 5 points. Warnock is even at 47 favorable, 47 unfavorable, but Abrams and Walker both are underwater in terms of their images. Although Walker was pretty much maximizing, although not quite as much as Kemp, the Republican vote, his image is softer among Republicans. You can see that, among Republicans, Kemp has a net 77, and Walker has a net positive 71 points. So there are some differences between the candidates on both sides. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything else to add on the images here.
Just on the independents again, Kemp is the only one above water. He's got a 7-point net favorable with them, whereas all three other candidates are underwater among independents. Again, I think pointing to Kemp's strength, and then again, just in terms of his popularity rating among Black voters 50 plus, certainly not popular with them, but the fact that a quarter of them view him favorably, they view him more favorably than the Black Republican, I think is pretty notable, and it helps explain why he's getting over 20% of the vote with them.
Definitely. Take a look at the political environment in the state. Pretty negative. The direction of the country, 88% say it's heading in the wrong direction. It's not as bad at the state level, but it's still bad. 59% said the state's heading in the wrong direction. And there's a lot of distrust with Washington. Agree, disagree. Members of Congress don't listen to people like me. Nearly everybody agrees with that statement. 87% of voters in Georgia agree with that statement. So there's a significant negative political headwind here at the environment level. Motivation. Here again is where voters 50 plus, who, as Deborah mentioned, are going to be a majority of the turnout in this midterm election. They are more motivated to vote. 90% of them, on a scale of 1 to 10, say that 10 is their motivation level to vote this year, and that's 4 points higher than the electorate overall. And so, these voters are going to turn up and vote. On that same measure, Republicans have a little bit more enthusiasm than Democrats. We've seen that in other places. It's not enormous, but it's there. It's a 4-point difference in motivation to vote. On the other metrics, the generic congressional ballot, we see a 3-point Republican advantage. So obviously Kemp is doing better than the generic Republican in the state. He has more going for him as an individual than the party. Biden's numbers are really bad. He's got a 34% job approval here. We asked a legacy Trump job approval question, and while also negative, it's about split between those who approved of the job he did versus disapproved. So there's clearly sort of a Republican flavored winds blowing in 2022 in the country, but here in Georgia as well.
And I would just add, I think that motivation question just underscores the importance of 50 plus voters in this electorate. If you like, not only are they a majority of the likely electorate, but also more motivated. And if you look at voters under 50, that gap grows to 9 points. They're at 81% extremely motivated versus 50 plus at 90%. So a good chance that 53% that we're currently projecting is even bigger, given the motivation gap that we see, and higher motivation among voters over the age of 50. The one other thing I would note just on motivation is we still see Republicans more motivated to vote. But it's just 4 points now. And this is a trend I think we're seeing nationally and obviously in Georgia here as well, that motivation gap narrowing a bit in the wake of Roe being overturned.
Yeah. Take a look at some of the issues. So we asked a question about what was your number one issue most important in deciding your vote for Senate. So it's not that they pick an issue and other issues are not important, but this is the one that's at the top. And what's at the top of Georgia voters' minds is the economy. 15% said the economy, an additional 14% said inflation and rising prices. So nearly 30% of the voters picked this as the single most important issue in deciding their vote for Senate this year. Followed by that are some of the cultural issues that are very topical right now: gun control or gun rights, immigration and border security, taxes and spending, and voting rights. What's interesting is looking at this top issue by the different partisan segments. So we look at Republicans and independents, they're actually profiling pretty similarly to each other. And each of these are about a third of the electorate in Georgia. They prioritize the economy, inflation. Both of them do, and then followed by immigration and border security after that. Democrats, this is not to say that inflation and the economy is not an important issue, but right now Democrats are prioritizing the more cultural issues. So, whether it's guns or voting rights here in Georgia, and also Social Security and Medicare. We did a little, a split sample comparison. This is the bottom of the screen, and you can see it, where we asked people, gave them two issue choices to say which one is going to be more important to you in deciding your vote. And in the split sample, we always asked inflation, and then it was either inflation versus the January 6th Commission or inflation versus the Supreme Court decision in Roe versus Wade. In both cases, inflation was seen as the more important issue. It just sort of underscores the fact that, that is what's on most voters' minds right now. And candidates who aren't talking about that are not speaking to where voters are right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was struck by, the fact that, independents, and that bottom right corner graph, still prioritizing inflation in the economy over abortion and the overturning of Roe versus Wade by a 17-point margin. And I think maybe even more notable is that holds among women, and is in fact even bigger among women 50 plus. They still prioritize inflation by a 22-point margin over the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
At the state level, voters 50 plus are also prioritizing the economy. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it's the same issue concerns generally are found when it comes to deciding their vote for governor. So Republicans and independents prioritize the economy and inflation. Democrats are prioritizing voting rights, guns, and abortion. Again, it's not that not everyone is concerned about the economy. This is the number one issue. And when it comes to inflation, it's gas prices, but it's also food prices, right? I mean, so people are getting hurt on a day-to-day basis, in their minds of rising prices. And so this is what candidates have to speak to.
I do think we see an interesting difference in the priorities among Democrats on this question for the governor at the state level versus the federal level, where at the federal level, they prioritizing guns, which we've definitely seen significantly rise following, Uvalde and Highland Park. Here, because of Georgia and what's going on with elections and voting there, it's very much about voting rights at the state level for Democrats.
And then we asked some questions about voting issues in Georgia, and those issues, are people comfortable with how the state's voting process and rules are set for this year? Majority are. I mean, there's definitely a sizable minority that aren't, but most are comfortable. They are familiar. 80% of them are familiar with the changes that have been made since 2020 in Georgia to the election laws. And then we asked people, are the laws that were passed, does it make it more difficult or easier to vote? And here we see a real partisan difference. So a third say it's going to make it more difficult for people to vote. 29% say it's going to make it easier to vote. And then the rest say it's no impact or didn't have an opinion. But that disparity between Democrats, independents, and Republicans is stark. And obviously 73, 3 out of 4 Democrats saying they believe the laws are going to make it more difficult to vote. But overall, there is majority of voters saying that they're comfortable. They don't like it. It'll probably be difficult, but they are comfortable with it. Most voters are going to be voting in person, but early. And you have about 57% of voters 50 plus say they'll vote early and in person. That's pretty consistent across the board. Various groups, about just under a third say they'll vote on election day. And then I know we want to save some time for questions. Real quick, if you want to speak to voters 50 plus, there are issues you can talk about that they find are both important and some policies that will really make a difference, right? So the importance of Social Security, importance of Medicare, these are not partisan issues. There's a slight difference partisanly, but Republicans, independents, and Democrats see Social Security and Medicare as being very important issues. And would they be more likely to vote for a Senate candidate that advocated protecting Social Security from cuts? 90% said they will. Protecting Medicare from cuts, 90% said they would. supporting Medicare to allow for lower negotiation to allow for lower prescription drug prices. 89% say they'd be more likely to vote for that candidate, and expanding access to long-term care, including home care. 83% be more likely. The intensity numbers on that are all over 50%. These are winning issues, people who want to talk to voters over 50 plus. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, and just from a Democrat perspective, I think that slide just really underscores, the importance of getting something done on reconciliation that allows Medicare to negotiate lower prescription drug prices. I mean, Democrats, trailing among voters 50 plus here, and that would really, help boost their odds. I believe if they're able to get something on that passed.
So I think we should pause here and see if anybody has any questions for us, because we do have a hard stop at 10 o'clock. I'm sorry to go long.
Yes, thank you, Matt and Bob. At this time, we're going to kick off the Q&A. Feel free to enter your questions into the chat or raise your Zoom hand to ask questions directly to the pollsters. So, Ben?
Hey, everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you all for taking some time out to do this. Extremely interesting data, very timely, especially, you said you just got out of the field. It's nice when that happens. Just a quick question. You all talked a little bit about the motivation, those numbers, obviously a slight edge for voters 50 plus, a slight edge for Republicans. Just wanted to talk, in your estimation, as people who advise candidates, have advised campaigns in the past, what are we talking right now as far as, are these numbers something that you think could, if they held, lead to sort of an edge in turnout? Or once you get numbers that are this high anyway, we're talking 81 at the lowest, it's all about fluid as far as a turnout model goes?
Well, I mean, yes, even a small margin is going to affect turnout. And when you're talking about a race, take the Senate race where it's, basically, statistically even, Warnock's got a 3-point lead. Any difference in turnout is going to matter. And so, this motivation number is something obviously that we'll be watching, as Matt alluded to. We've seen it have a wider spread earlier in this election year. The events that have happened have narrowed it now. There's still a gap, and there's lots of time for that to change based on events, that happen between now and election day. So I think it is something to keep watching, and it will have election on close races.
Yeah, I think the 10-point gap between older and younger voters and motivation is meaningful, and I do think that would likely, mean a slightly higher turnout among voters over 50 than we would typically expect, if that holds.
Thank you.
Other questions? I will ask a quick question here then. How do these findings compare to other key races around the country, specifically the support of 50 plus voters for Governor Kemp?
So what we've seen in other races, AARP, we've just, a few weeks ago released a survey in Pennsylvania, for example, where the races were extremely close, and the 50 plus, and I think in both cases the Democrats had the lead, but among 50 plus voters, the races were dead even. Here we're seeing a similar trend. Older voters are voting a little bit more Republican than Democrat, but in terms of motivation, it's higher, and we've seen that across the country. And it's, they are going to play a significant role in these elections. And as we pointed out here in Georgia, I mean, the difference between independents, and voters 50 plus, that's where this election is going to, matter. And so, Matt, I don't know if you would add to that.
Yeah, I would just say I think a lot of the data we see here is consistent with what we see nationally. You know, the fact that voters over 50 are more motivated to vote is not unique to Georgia, and is something we see across the country. And the other trend I would say is also similar. Is Democrats underperforming what they currently get among Black voters, as we're seeing, in both these races, but especially the governor's race. But that's a trend we're seeing nationally as well.
Well, I want to thank Matt and Bob. And that wraps up our event. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We will follow up later today with a brief of this morning's discussion, as well as links to AARP resources. You can also feel free to contact Matt Holmes, AARP Georgia Communications Manager, at mholmes@aarp.org, or our National External Relations team at media@aarp.org at any time. Thank you again and have a great day.